And their ideas now were beginning to become much more potent in the studio. And they would start telling me what they wanted, and they would start pressing me for more ideas and more ways of translating those ideas into reality.
We were just starting, I feel, to really find ourselves in the studio, what we could do, which was, over just being the four of us playing our instruments and the vocals.
We all kind of were very aware that we didn't live in each other's pockets anymore. We all had separate existences.
We started to grow up, and we started to have families, and we started to put less energy into the Beatle bag.
It doesn't matter about people not liking our records or not liking the way we look or what we say. They're entitled to not like us. We're entitled not to have anything to do with them if we don't want to, or not to regard them. We've all got our rights,
We were the ones trapped in the middle of it while everybody else was going mad. We were actually the sanest people in the whole thing.
For us, it was just a drag, we knew that they wouldn't hear anything because it's just, like a riot and not sort of like a show,
It felt dangerous, because everybody was out of hand and out of line. Even the cops were out of line. They were all just caught up in the mania. It was like they were in this big movie. They used us as an excuse to go mad. The world did, and then blamed it on us.
The realization, was really kicking in that nobody was listening. And that was okay at the beginning. But even worse than that is we were playing so bad.
I personally, as I say, I don't really think it was that bad.
I think it just started to hit everybody. I remember we had one meeting and we were just mainly talking about the musicianship was going downhill, never mind the boredom of doing it. There was always so much more pressure from the minute you opened your eyes, people trying to get at you, for whatever reason, to be friends or to get an interview or to do a radio. The pressure was on from the minute you started.
It had been 4 years for us of legging around in this mania. And we were tired, we needed a rest.
They showed no signs of flagging as far as their musical creativity was concerned. On the contrary, they were becoming more and more productive, and the work they were giving me was much more interesting. They were finding new frontiers all the time.
I had the privilege to sit down with Paul and go through the mixes and listen. It's their album, and he said you can really hear the fact we were individuals, and that's I think what Revolver is. You hear all four of them, and you hear all four of their input onto it. George was listening to Indian music, had studied and become, a pretty good sitar player by now. Revolver is like that popping off of a champagne bottle, and just all the ideas they had sort of just spewed out. And the band sort of entered the studios for the first time having time. Not much time. Revolver that didn't take very long. It wasn't like Sgt. Pepper's, but they did have some time, and they immediately went to experiment.
If we earn $10 million in America, after the American government taxes what's left that comes back, we get taxed like 95%. Out of £1 million, then to pay all the taxes and all this and that on it, I'd end up with 80,000, and the government would have £920,000. So because we were set up when we were kids in a situation where we paid maximum for everything.
Well, that was the point where you discover you're not actually really paying more money to the tax man than you are. You get so happy that you finally started earning money. And then you find out that, in those days we paid 19 shillings and sixpence out of every pound. That's when there was 20 shillings in a pound, and that was with super tax and surtax and tax and stuff. And
You know, it was ridiculous, a heavy penalty to pay for making money.
Do any of you have plans to record on your own? English voice.
We do at home. We might. No?
In fact, we have done, I think.
Have we?
Well, Eleanor Rigby was Paul on his own, and
we were just drinking tea.
Eleanor Rigby's 8-string player is a double-string quartet. I think originally Paul wrote on acoustic guitar. Very simple song. He collaborated with my father on doing a string arrangement, and they both loved the work of Bernard Herrmann, who has famously wrote the music for Psycho. And that was the inspiration behind the staccato strings. And what's great about this, you hear the collaboration with the players. And I always had this view of, in those days, perhaps string players may be a bit pompous about playing on pop records, because it was unusual in those times. But they are fully engaged, and they have an opinion, and the music, I suppose, was so good that they were happy to do it.
When I was in Liverpool, there was a little block which was for pensioners, old age pensioners. I used to go round to this old lady's. I got to know her. I spent hours just chatting to her. She's telling me about the war. She had a crystal radio, which is like magic. Yeah, I love them. I think that's where it came from, the idea of being a lonely old lady. And then I just started to imagine her life, wearing a face that she keeps in a jar by the door. When I grew up, all the older people kept like their teeth in jars. So this idea of like having a face, it's like cold cream and all stuff, all the women used to hair in curlers. Yeah. I don't know where they thought they were going. That was always that image, so I kind of followed it through.
I have prepared a statement which I will read, which has had John Lennon's absolute approval this afternoon with myself by telephone. And this is as follows. The quote which John Lennon made to a London columnist more than 3 months ago has been quoted and represented entirely out of context.
And there was big news about that. You know, they've only sold 50,000 seats. You know, it's all over for the Beatles, says, you know, Roger Whittaker of the Dallas Times.
John did a spool of tape of a rough mix of the backing track to I'm Only Sleeping. And he didn't realize because the tape was tails out, and they just stuck it on a reel, and he put it on his tape machine and threaded the tail in forward and got it backwards. That's when he came in the next day and said, "Oh yeah, backwards." And then we made him turn the tape over, play it backwards, and he all played, I think John and I, or Paul and I, played guitars, just like random notes on the guitars. And then we turned the tape back over to see what we had, and that was like the first time we had a backwards solo.
It was just around that period when we were all getting into various different kinds of music, and George's became Indian. I think all of us were listening to sort of classical and various types of music other than our own and our rock and roll kind of roots. And George just sort of moved into the Indian thing.
Well, actually, during the filming of Help, there was some Indian musicians in a restaurant scene, and I kind of messed around with the sitar then. But during that year, towards the end of that year anyway, I kept hearing the name of Ravi Shankar. I heard it about 3 times. You know, it felt very familiar to me to listen to that music.
I think the structure of it, I like it. It always reminds me in structure of a great Cole Porter song, Cheek to Cheek, which Fred Astaire sang. And it starts off heaven, I'm in heaven, it goes through it. And then in the middle, it goes a lot, but it takes me back to heaven. And it's so neat the way it just wraps itself up. And I always thought, wow, that's a great trick, you know. So Here, There and Everywhere does that. Here, first verse, second verse, there, third verse, everywhere. And leading me back to here, you know. That was what attracted me. And then I think that wouldn't have been enough to make it my favourite song, but I think it's got a nice melody. So the combination of those always made it one of my big favourites. And that's a question you get asked a lot, what's your favourite song? So, but that one, when I'm pushed, I will pull that one out of the bag, and it is definitely amongst my favourites.
Then I'd started writing myself, but it used to be just hard, to bring your songs in when you had Lennon and McCartney. And it used to be a bit of a joke, really, because I would bring these songs I'd written in, and they'd all be rolling on the floor laughing because, I'd rewritten an old standard again. I was great at rewriting Jerry Lee Lewis songs. We'd be well into the album, and we all knew that, I'd be doing a number somewhere. Just about 3/4 of the way through, so we'd either say, have you got a song, or we've got this for you.
I thought it might not be a bad idea, for him, rather than trying to give him a very serious song, because he wasn't that keen on singing. So the idea came up to do that. I just remember lying in bed, just that moment before you're going to sleep, that little twilight moment, when silly ideas come into your head anyway. And then I just thought of this thing, Yellow Submarine,
We all live in a yellow submarine.
We were having more fun in the studio. It was getting more experimental. The songs were getting better, more interesting.
Good day, sunshine.
There weren't like big plans. Sometimes it just unfolded. Complete fluke.
Money was partly the goal, but it still wasn't let's get some money. But we suddenly had money, and then it wasn't all that good.
By having the money, we found that money wasn't the answer, because we had lots of material things that people sort of spend their whole life to try and get. We managed to get them at quite an early age, and it was good, really, because we learned that wasn't it. We still lacked something, and that something is the thing that religion is trying to give to people.
They were getting more and more interested in unusual sounds, and yes, I mean, they were trying out new instruments and always coming to me saying, "What ideas have you got for this?" Yesterday had been a breakthrough. First time we'd ever used other instrumentalists on the records. The only person who had ever played with them before was me. And now we had a group of other musicians.
Somewhere between albums and tours, there was a day where I had a dentist anyway.
One night, John and his wife, Cynthia, and Patty and myself were having dinner at this guy's house. Now, this fella, for some reason or other, had obtained lysergic acid diethylamide 25, which at that time was
it was not illegal, but we didn't really know about it. I seem to recall that I'd heard vaguely about it, but I didn't really know what it was.
And he just put it in our coffee or something, and we went. He was saying, I advise you not to. He didn't know what it was. There was just a sort of, it's all the thing, with the sort of the middle class London swingers or whatever. Had all heard about it, and they didn't know it was different from pot or pills. And they gave us it, and he was saying, I advise you not to leave. And we thought he was all trying to keep us for an orgy in his house, and we didn't want to know,
Something like a very concentrated version of the best feeling I'd ever had in my life. It was just like fantastic. I just felt like in love, but not with anything in particular or anybody, just with everything. Everything was perfect. And we walked, and things weren't the same that night as they'd been. It was all this Alice in Wonderland stuff was going on, but strange things. I didn't have too many songs. They were more or less the ones I'd written. I've always had a couple of ones I was working on or thinking about. And later, in the later years, I did have a huge backlog. But in the mid-60s, I think, you know, I didn't have too many.
Well, I think George went through the same problem I went through first as presenting his songs. But, you know, that didn't really last long. Then he started coming up with great songs.
I just want to carry on progressing with music, you know, writing more and just learning more about it. I've written so many songs that I've just thrown away as I've been writing them because I've wanted, when I've finally recorded one of mine, I've wanted it to be, you know, worth putting on the LP alongside Paul and John. I feel now I've got more idea about how to write songs.
In those days, there was no technology like there is now. I mean, there was 2 guitars, bass and drums, and that was it. If we did stuff in the studio with the aid of recording tricks, then we couldn't just reproduce them on stage. Like nowadays, you could do Tomorrow Never Knows, have all the loops up there on a keyboard, kind of emulator stuff, and you could have as many piano players and drummers and, you know, orchestras, whatever you wanted. But in those days, that's it. We were just a little dance hall band, and we never really thought of augmenting ourselves.
And it was on Revolver that, of course, we have the track Tomorrow Never Knows, which was a great innovation.
That's me in my Tibetan Book of the Dead period. And the expression Tomorrow Never Knows was another of Ringo's. So I gave it a throwaway title because I was a bit self-conscious about the lyrics of Tomorrow Never Knows. So I took one of Ringo's malapropisms, which was like Hard Day's Night, and sort of to take the edge off the heavy philosophical lyrics.
John had this song which was all on the chord of C, which in our minds was okay, like Indian music's all on one chord, perfectly good idea. I was wondering how George Martin was going to take it, because it was a bit of a radical departure, you know. At least we'd had 3 chords, and maybe a change for the middle 8 even, you know. Suddenly this was just John just strumming on the C rather earnestly.
Slow down or speed up your tape, you can put in backward stuff, you can put in electronic sounds. And this is the kind of thing you can do on recording, that you obviously couldn't possibly do it live, because it is, in fact, making up music as you go along.
John was not mechanically minded, and he took a tape home, and the tape had run off to the other reel, and he put it on like it was the start, but it was the end of the song, and that's when the guitar came.
Tomorrow Never Knows breaks so many barriers, musically speaking, and does so many things that no one had done before. It's got a drone all the way through, which is something that has Indian music and used to exist in Western music in the 12th century. So it sort of triggered a whole movement that popular music would start to bring in these other influences from the avant-garde and put them into mainstream songs, into an album that millions of people will hear.
John called me for the first time and asked me if I could come up with a cover. And I was just really knocked out. I couldn't believe it. And they said, come down to the studio and we play you the tracks we have up to now. So that's what they did. They played me the tracks, and the music was so astonishing. This was just such a step into a direction which was not known to pop music at the time, where you have birds fluttering and you have backward cymbals and guitar solos and noises and double speed stuff and really incredible. I was just really, how can you say, I was like in a different world suddenly, and it was very hard for me to actually know what was I going to do for that record, because this was not a normal pop record. This was something into the future. So I had to try, and that's what I always do when I get a job, a graphic job, is I have to see what's the frame, what is the public? I couldn't be too surrealistic, too crazy. I couldn't be like Hieronymus Bosch or something. I had to stay in line, so to speak. I had to go home and think of something, and I was racking my brains and couldn't come up with a solution. I finally said, what do we need? It's the faces the people have to see. Like always, they always have to see the faces of the band. And then they need lots of photos. And the third thing was hair, lots of hair. I had the idea of doing a collage again, and I think it's a great idea, and it's good to do, because then the people that get an original in their hands and they see, he is actually working on this cover. And of course, it's a different version of the actual final cover, where like Paul is not there and John is not there. So it's different, but this is right in the middle of creating it. And that's what we wanted, that there's a piece of scissors lying there, or a knife, or a pencil, or a brush. All these things you actually use when you are at the table working on a piece.
What were you trying to convey with this cover artwork?
New hair is really, really important, and the fact that they had hair on their forehead and stuff was like a completely new thing. Normally the people had shaved their heads and had a normal hairstyle, and this was sensational. It was really very, very important at the time. And at the same time, important was that the fans had something to look at. So I put lots of pictures on it, as many pictures as I could possibly put on it that still would look good, so that the fans could see their Beatles.
Our whole attitude was changing. We'd grown up a little.
You know, the direction was just changing away from the sort of thank you girl of the poppy stuff, you know, the early stuff, From Me to You, She Loves You. And I think, you know, there came a point where we thought, well, we've done enough of that. We can branch out a little bit into songs that are a little bit more surreal, a little bit more entertaining.
I don't see too much difference myself in Rubber Soul and Revolver. To me, they could both be like Volume 1 and Volume 2. Maybe I'm wrong, I haven't played them right back to back of each other, but they both were very pleasant and enjoyable records for me.
There's a slight punk and prog mentality to Revolver, where they just went, okay, you know, I think the world are going, which one's the cute one, which one's the smart one, which one's the funny one, etc., etc. And they realized that they were a band made up of 4 individuals, and those 4 individuals had very different approaches that all worked together. It was almost like, you know, they couldn't. And what's interesting is that their next album, they went and put the suits on and became a Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This is a glimpse of what was to happen, you know, Revolver.
You know, when we first started, we were the nice, clean mop tops and every mother's son, and everyone loved us. And then suddenly, you know, there's a few things that they don't understand. It's just we're men now, you know, we're a bit older than those lads that started out. You can't live all your life by what they want. You know, we can't go on forever as 4 clean little mop tops playing She Loves You.
They were no longer the pop band, the Beatles. They were moving away from Beatlemania. They'd moved quickly on from, you know, Day Tripper, Ticket to Ride, into doing something which was more spiritual and meant something different to them. You know, not better, not worse, just the Beatles were relentless progress and they needed to move on. And that's what Revolver is. It's like the need to move on.